The year was 2014. I was 17, a quiet senior just trying to make it through the final stretch of high school. Every morning, I'd walk a few blocks to the bus stop located on a busy main street. The routine was comfortably numb. Always the same cracked sidewalks, the same squeal of the brakes, the same tired faces on the bus. But that day, something in the air felt off, like the stillness before a storm. When school let out, the sun was low, casting long, orange shadows across the road. I was halfway home when a silver Honda van slowed down alongside me. At first, I thought the driver was lost. Then, a girl my age hopped out of the passenger seat, smiling as if we'd known each other for years, and, "Hey, I just moved here," she said. "I don't know anyone yet. And you look nice. Want to hang out sometime?" I hesitated. She had an effortless energy, cute clothes, a cheerful voice, but something in her eyes didn't quite match the smile. Still, I was lonely, and the idea of a new friend seemed harmless. I gave her my number. We texted later that night, chatting about music and school. By the next day, we had planned to go out for dinner. When the van pulled up again, the same one as the day before, I climbed in without much thought. But this time, she wasn't alone. A man was driving, older, maybe late 20s, with sharp cheekbones and a calm, practiced voice. A different, quiet girl was in the back seat, staring at her hands. My stomach clenched a little, but I told myself I was overreacting. People carpool, so I carpool, right? The drive started with small talk, but the man kept taking over the conversation. He was too smooth, too curious. He asked questions about where I lived, which school I went to, what my mom did for work. He laughed a lot, but his eyes never really did. At the restaurant, the other girls barely spoke. The man kept complimenting me, saying I had a good aura and that he could read people. Then, he said something that made the hair on my arm stand up. "You know, I can read minds, too." He started telling me things about my life, things he shouldn't have known. My bus route, my mother's name, even the color of my bedroom walls. I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it as a coincidence. Maybe the girl told him, I thought. But deep down, a silent fear began to sprout. After dinner, he insisted we swing by their house. "Just for a minute," he said, flashing that effortless smile again. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed. The house was in a completely different city, nowhere near my neighborhood. My unease grew, but the place looked expensive. Marble floors, large windows, a Mercedes parked in the driveway. It didn't fit the image of danger. He said they were all roommates, hustlers, pursuing their dreams together. To a 17-year-old who rarely saw the world, it sounded adventurous, almost glamorous. When he dropped me off that night, he promised we'd hang out again soon. I didn't realize it then, but that short drive home was the last normal moment of my life. A few days passed before I heard from them again. This time, the man texted me directly. He said the girl had mentioned I was special, that he liked my energy. It felt oddly flattering, like getting attention from someone older, someone wiser. He asked if I wanted to hang out again. I told myself it was harmless. After all, they had dropped me off safely the last time. When the van pulled up that evening, I recognized the engine before I saw it. The girl was in the passenger seat, smiling again, but quieter this time. The man greeted me like an old friend. "Glad you came back," he said. "We were hoping you would." We drove toward the city. The sun was setting, leaving streaks of purple and red across the sky. The man talked the whole way, telling stories about how hard he grew up, how he learned to see into people's true nature. Every word was polished, slick, as if he'd said it 100 times before. The girl barely moved. I remember wondering why she looked so empty, like she'd been hollowed out. At the restaurant, things got weirder. The man ordered for everyone without asking what we wanted. He kept his tone light, but it felt like a performance. He leaned forward as we ate, asking deep, personal questions. "Do you ever feel misunderstood?" he'd ask. "Like no one really gets you?" It was hard to defend against. I was 17, and no adult had ever spoken to me that way, like I was an equal, someone worth listening to. The more he talked, the more I wanted to believe he meant well. But every time I caught the eyes of the other girls, they looked away. Mid-dinner, he started his strange trick again. "I told you I could read minds, huai xia xia," he murmured. Then he started listing details about my week, things I hadn't told anyone. He knew about my English test, a text argument I'd had with a friend. Even that I skipped breakfast that morning. My heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't figure out how he knew so much. Maybe the girl told him, but how did she know about my test? He smiled as if he could see my confusion. "Don't be scared," Bonnie said. "You and I, we have a connection. Some people are just meant to meet." After dinner, he offered to drive me home, but said he needed to swing by his place first. "Just for a couple of minutes." The girl nodded, as if to reassure me. Not wanting to be rude, I agreed, but the drive got longer and longer, the streetlights thinning out, until we were in another city. When we finally stopped, the house was enormous. Expensive cars lined the driveway. The man spoke as if it were nothing special. "Welcome to our place," he said. "This is where real success happens." And inside, everything was gleaming, clean marble floors, the scent of new furniture, and a faint hint of men's cologne in the air. He said they all lived together, a team of hustlers chasing the good life. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that luxury meant safety. That night, he drove me home by himself. The girl waved goodbye from the doorway, her smile even fainter now. As we drove off, he said quietly, "You have potential. Don't waste it." His tone seemed kind, but there was something hidden beneath it, more of a command than a compliment. I didn't know it, but that was the hook. The moment the line went taut, and I was caught. After that night, things moved fast. The girl would text me occasionally, but mostly it was the man who kept in touch. He was incredibly charming over text, funny, attentive, always knowing the right thing to say. It felt like he genuinely cared. He'd sometimes call me kiddo and say he saw potential in me, like I was destined for something bigger than a normal life. He started painting this dream for me, a life of freedom, luxury, and family, the word he used for their group. "You don't have to struggle," he'd say. "You're smart, you're loyal, you could be one of us." At first, it felt like a harmless fantasy, like being invited into a secret club. But his texts became more personal, more possessive. "You don't really fit in with those kids at school," he said once. "They'll never understand you like I do." He'd call late at night, his voice soft and persuasive. When he talked, I forgot the unease he had caused me before. Then came the invitation. He told me to pack a small bag and come stay the weekend with him, just to see how things are. My mom was used to me staying at friends' houses, so I said I'd be gone for a night or two. I didn't realize I had just made the worst decision of my life. When he picked me up, the girl was in the car, but she barely spoke. The atmosphere felt different this time, heavier. The drive was silent. No music, no jokes. When we pulled up to the familiar, enormous house, my stomach dropped. Something deep inside screamed that I shouldn't go in, but I pushed it away. Inside, the other girl disappeared down the hall without a word. The man told me to sit down. He smiled, calmly, confidently, and started talking about loyalty, about building trust. Then, he dropped a line like it was nothing. "The girls you met, They work for me. They make money. You will, too. I remember laughing because I thought he was joking, but the way his face remained blank, it froze my blood. I said no, that I wanted to go home. That's when his tone changed. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "You are home." He gave me a new phone, saying it was for your safety. I didn't realize it had tracking on it. When I tried to text my mom, he snatched it from my hand and said I'd understand soon enough. The next morning, the doors were locked. The house was spotless, but something was wrong. Every mirror looked too clean. Every window was covered by blinds. The girls moved like ghosts, silent, obedient, never meeting my eye. When I asked one how long she'd been there, she whispered, "Don't ask. It's easier that way." The days blurred together. I wasn't allowed to go outside. The man made me sit with him for hours, talking about control and discipline, saying he could hear my thoughts when I was disobedient. Sometimes, he'd finish my sentences as if he knew what I was going to say. It terrified me. I started to believe him. Then he said the one thing that made everything shatter. "You belong to me now. You'll thank me when you're stronger." From that moment, I didn't feel like a person anymore. I was a possession, a name he owned. He dictated what I wore, how I spoke, even how I looked at him. The more I resisted, the more dangerous his smile became. And one night, as he watched me in the reflection of the dark window, he murmured, "You are learning. Good. The sooner you stop fighting, the sooner life will get easier." That's when I realized there was no weekend visit. There was no choice. I wasn't staying. I was trapped. It didn't take long for the illusion of kindness to be completely stripped away. The moment I stopped fighting, when I accepted there was no escape, his true nature emerged. The man I had once thought was confident and charming turned out to be something else entirely. There was a coldness to him, as if he enjoyed watching fear bloom in someone's eyes. He told me that pain builds loyalty. He said he needed to train me, to break me down before he could rebuild me into the kind of woman he wanted. I didn't know what that meant until the first time he punished me. Not for anything serious, just because I hesitated when he told me to do something. His calm voice stayed the same as he grabbed my arm, forced me to the floor, and whispered, "You think too much, fish. Stop thinking." After that, things got darker every day. He watched me constantly, claiming he could tell what I was thinking, that my body betrayed me. When he stared into my eyes, I could almost believe he wasn't human. His eyes would change, darken somehow, as if they held something hollow and endless. The other girls moved through the house like shadows, silent and bruised. We never spoke, but sometimes our eyes would meet, just long enough to share the same quiet horror. He used pain to control, a slap for looking away, a shove for asking a question. Sometimes he'd apologize immediately afterward, saying it was for your growth. It was a manipulation so twisted that I began to doubt my own instincts. I kept thinking, maybe I did something wrong. Maybe if I just stayed quiet, he would be kind again. But kindness from him always came at a cost. At night, he would make me sit next to him on the sofa while he played videos on his phone. Horrific things. People being hurt, tortured. He said it was to toughen me up. I wanted to close my eyes, but he would press a knife to my neck and whisper, "Look, this is the real world. You're lucky it's me who's teaching you." There was a moment, just a flash, when I thought I saw pleasure on his face when he did it. Not anger, not hatred, just pleasure. That was the worst part. I started living minute by minute, trying to anticipate his mood. Some days he was calm, almost affectionate. Others, he was irritable for no reason. The girls were sent out to work, and when they were gone, he would come to my room. He said I was different, that I was special. I quickly learned that special meant obedient. There were times he'd whisper things like, "You're lucky you met me before the world ruined you." And I would nod because disagreement meant pain. I was barely 18, yet I felt like an old woman, hollowed out and exhausted. Every night before I slept, I stared at the ceiling and thought about my mother, wondering if she was still checking my room, still hoping I would come home. I desperately wanted to contact her, but the phone he gave me was never out of his sight. Even when he wasn't in the room, I could feel him, as if his presence had seeped into the walls. The house had become a cage, and the man who once promised freedom was the monster guarding the door. There is only so much pain a person can endure before something inside them breaks. Not the kind of breaking that leaves you empty, but the kind that lets you see clearly for the first time. For me, that moment came one night after he lost control. I don't remember what set him off. It could have been anything: answering too slowly, looking away, breathing the wrong way. He grabbed me by the neck, threw me down, and screamed that I was trying to read his mind. The irony almost made me laugh. But then the blows started. The hits blurred together, fists, with feet, meaningless words. "You're mine," he kept saying. "You're never leaving." Then silence. For a second, I thought he was done. But he put his foot on my throat and started kicking me in the stomach, repeatedly, until the world went white. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, the room was spinning. My head throbbed, my vision tunneled, and the taste of blood filled my mouth. He wasn't there anymore. I could hear his footsteps upstairs, pacing. That's when I knew, if I stayed, he would kill me. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. I no longer cared about the threats, the promises that he would find me or hurt my family. None of it mattered anymore. Dying while trying to escape was better than dying in that house. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited. Every creak, every shift in sound made my body tense. I listened until his heavy footsteps slowed, then stopped. A few minutes later, the sound I had been praying for came, the deep, ragged snoring of a man who thought he had won. I moved silently, too terrified to breathe. The house was cold, the air thick with men's cologne and that strange fear. I didn't take anything, not even the phone. It had a tracker, and I knew it would lead him straight to me. My hand shook as I turned the knob on the back door. It creaked, a small sound, but it felt deafening. I froze, listening. Nothing, just the snoring. When the door opened, the night air hit my face like a slap. It was the first free breath I'd felt in months. My feet moved instinctively, carrying me barefoot down the driveway and onto the dark street. Every shadow looked like him. Every sound behind me was a threat. I didn't stop running until the lights of a gas station came into view. Inside, the clerk stared at me as if I were a ghost. My clothes were torn. My face was swollen. I asked to use the phone, but when I tried to dial my mother's number, I froze. I was too afraid. Afraid he would trace the call. Afraid he would show up before my mom could get there. So I hung up and just kept moving, boarding the first bus that pulled up. I didn't even look at the route. For weeks, I drifted, sleeping in shelters, sometimes with people I barely knew. I didn't call my mother, didn't tell anyone where I was. I was free, but I wasn't safe. The fear stayed with me, as if he was still inside my head, whispering, "You can't hide." But I had gotten out. Somehow, against all odds, I was alive. And for the first time in months, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could stay that way. I didn't contact my mother for almost 3 months after I escaped. Every day, I told myself I'd call her tomorrow, and every day, the fear stopped me. I imagined him standing outside her apartment, waiting. He had promised he would find me, and I believed him. but the silence became unbearable. One night, I borrowed a stranger's phone and finally dialed her number. The sound of her voice shattered me. She cried so hard she couldn't speak for a full minute. Between sobs, she told me she'd filed a missing persons report, that detectives had been around multiple times. She thought I was dead. When I finally went home, she didn't ask for details. She just held me the way she used to when I was little, as if she could ward off the darkness by hugging tightly enough. But you can't hug away what I went through. The bruises faded, but the nightmares didn't. I woke up gasping, feeling his breath on my neck, hearing his voice in my ear. Eventually, I tried to rebuild. I got a job. I started dancing in clubs, not because I wanted to, but because it was something I was in control of. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. What he had forced me toward was now my choice. That choice was power, even if it didn't feel like much. Then one morning in 2017, everything changed. A detective showed up at my workplace, asking for me by name. My stomach seized. I thought it was him, somehow free, coming to drag me back. But when the detective said his name, it wasn't fear I felt. It was relief. They had caught him. One of the other girls had escaped. Smarter than me, perhaps braver. She had set him up, gathered evidence, and gone to the police. When they raided the house, they found everything: videos, phones, records of what he had done. The monster who claimed he could read minds couldn't read his own future. He was going to prison. The detective asked if I would testify, but I couldn't bring myself to face him again. I didn't have to. There was already enough evidence. When I read the news articles later, I saw his mugshot. He didn't look powerful anymore, just empty. And for the first time, I saw the truth behind those dark eyes. He wasn't superhuman, or psychic, or anything else he pretended to be. He was just a cruel man who thought control was love. I still keep in touch with the other girls who survived. We talk sometimes, sharing small victories, a new job, a new apartment, even a laugh. We are all scarred, but there is a strange sisterhood in survival. None of us came out the same, but we came out alive. Even now, years later, I walk fast when I'm alone at night. I still jump when I hear a van slow down behind me. But I also know what he never did. No matter how much darkness someone injects into you, there is always a part that refuses to die. That part, the part that ran, the part that fought, the part that survived, that is what saved me. And that is what ensures he will never own me again. This whole messed up thing, it happened early last year. And honestly, it still creeps me out if I let my mind linger on it for too long. You know that feeling, like something cold is crawling up your spine? Yeah, that. So, let me set the scene first. Let me explain why I was even out there, alone, at that insane hour. I drive for Uber Eats, part-time hustle. Been doing it for over a year now. You know, just grinding to make some extra cash. Oh, and I'm a girl, so. Driving alone at 2 a.m. Nah. Yeah, I'm sure you get the picture. Look, most of the time, it's chill. But the money? Frankly, the money sucks. Especially driving at night. Past 10 p. Nyash. It's all garbage fast food orders. It throws you into the city's worst corners, delivering to people who definitely aren't going to tip. I'm not kidding. I swear my tip rate is like 2 out of 10. Pathetic. That's the gig economy for you. It's just pure, exhausting isolation. You're alone in your car, cruising through dark, empty streets, and you always have that little voice in your head. The risk you try to ignore. So I almost never drive those hours. It's not worth the gas. But that night was different. There was a bonus. Complete 15 trips, and you get an extra 75 bucks. And I needed that money. This wasn't really a choice. It was mandatory. When that bonus is hanging out there, the night shift is gold. The roads are empty. You just fly. Pick up, drop off, done. The faster the better. The sooner I could get home and crash. Clear roads. It was perfect for me. I was grinding like crazy. I finished my last trip, McDonald's, of course, at 2:30 in the morning. The bonus was in the bag. Mission accomplished. I was dead tired, but satisfied. I hit my target. Now, it was just time to go home. Okay, so for context, this was in San Diego, right downtown. San Diego is a city of two faces. By day, or in the busy areas, like the gas lamp, it's fun, well lit, restaurants, clubs, but you only have to drive a few blocks off, especially at night. Everything changes completely. For night drivers like me, there's a line, 16th Street. That is the line. It's like you drive through an invisible wall. Once you cross that street, it gets genuinely sketchy. Past midnight, the social order there pretty much evaporates. This is the territory of homeless encampments, of shadows you only catch in your periphery, lurking in the darkness. I always actively avoided that area. But, unfortunately, the fastest way home, the route to the freeway, required me to cut right through that neighborhood. And here is the crucial detail. The detail that still gives me the chills when I think about it now. My car. I drive a 2002 Ford Focus. It's a junker, and I mean junker for a reason. Nothing on that car is automated, especially the windows. You want to roll the window up, there's no button. You have to lean across the passenger seat, grab the cheap plastic lever, and crank. It's not just inconvenient. That night, it was a deadly security flaw. Think about it. You can't just press a button and focus on the road. You have to lean down, take your eyes off the street, and wrestle that stiff thing. It's slow, it's clumsy, and it makes a loud rattle, rattle, rattle sound. And because of that hassle, I had a bad habit. When I made a delivery, I almost always left both windows down. For speed, grabbing the food, handing it off. And that night, damn it, I kept that habit. The windows were wide open. I had a plan in my head. Okay, I'm going to roll the windows up before I hit 16th Street. That was my safety rule. Always. It's just, that night, I didn't make it. I hadn't even reached that street yet. I had just turned onto a completely dark side street to cut out to the main road. And instantly, up ahead, I saw something. No. Someone. A silhouette. Just standing there, on the curb. And my heart, instantly, thump, went tight. Something was wrong. What I saw was a man in an orange, reflective construction vest. You know the kind. You see them 1,000 times. He was standing neatly on the side of the road. That's normal. Downtown is always under construction, and they work at night to avoid traffic. So, my brain automatically filed him under safe. I didn't really pay attention. We're all programmed that way, right? To trust the uniform. A vest, a hard hat. They're symbols of order, of someone on the job. Your brain immediately tells you this is an authority figure. Follow their lead. And as I drove closer, the man suddenly ran. He ran straight into the street, waving his arms, motioning for me to stop. And naturally I did. My reflex was to obey. I started easing on the brakes. I heard the engine groan down. 10 miles an hour. Then 5 km. I maintained my distance, squinting, trying to figure out what he wanted. A turn to the left? Was there an accident? But he wasn't directing traffic. He started jogging, not jogging away. He was jogging straight toward the front of my car. It wasn't the hurried stride of a worker. It was a determined kind of run. He stopped right at my bumper, standing stiff, dead blocking my route. A cold jolt went down my spine. This wasn't right. This was deeply wrong. I wish my windows had been up. It was 3 in the morning. I was on a dark side street. No people, no other cars. Just me and this guy. People talk about fight or flight. I always wondered which one I was. Now I know. I'm the third one. I froze. My foot was concrete, glued to the brake pedal. While I was slowing down, my brain was only just starting to process. But it was 5 seconds too late. And 5 seconds in this scenario is an eternity. Because when he was right in front of my bumper, in the dim glow of the old Focus's headlights, I saw it clearly. This was not a construction worker. He had the hard hat. He had the vest. But he was wearing the most horrifying smile I've ever seen. It wasn't a smile. It was a grimace, a stretched-out grin that went ear to ear. A smile that did not, for a second, touch his eyes. His eyes. They were wild. Try it. Try grinning at a stranger for 5 seconds without saying anything. It's terrifying. And this guy was doing exactly that. Now that he was close, I could see he was an older man. Maybe 60, but the poverty and street life make everyone look the same age. But he just stood there, staring, eyes wide, feral, and grinning, showing all his teeth. Honestly, the image. It was straight out of American Horror Story, like Twisty the Clown. I swear. He looked completely unhinged. A part of my brain screamed, "Reverse, floor it in reverse." But I couldn't. I was paralyzed. I just sat there, clutching the steering wheel. And the only thought in my head was, this is how I die. The entire time, he didn't say a word, just stared. And then, so fast I couldn't react, he jumped. He lunged onto the hood of my car. With a sickening quickness, a dull thud rang out. The whole car shook. He slammed his fist down on the metal right in front of me. I froze in absolute terror. I could only watch. He started pounding, blow after blow. And then he moved. He didn't stand up. He started crawling. He scrambled across the hood on his hands and knees, like a huge spider, his fingernails scratching the paint. But here's the worst part. The whole time, he did not utter a single sound. He never stopped smiling. And he never broke eye contact. His eyes were glued to mine through the windshield. It was like he was pinning me down with his gaze. I thought, if he had yelled or cursed or shattered the glass, it might have been less terrifying. But it was the silence, that insane silence, combined with the smile and the unblinking stare. It was psychological torture. And then the sheer horror hit me. My windows were wide open. I could smell him, sour sweat and dust. The night air he was breathing was now in my car. There was only a door's distance between us, and the thought of reaching over to crank the window handle made me want to vomit. But the fear of doing so was even greater. I was terrified that any sudden movement, any action that broke this silence, even taking my eyes off him for a second, that would be the signal. That was the invitation. And he would launch himself inside. They say it's true. When you're in a state of sheer terror, time just fractures. It stops flowing. In reality, that whole spectacle probably lasted 15 maybe 20 seconds. But to me, it was a drawn-out millennium. Every detail was magnified, like your brain is in slow-motion replay. The dry thud of his fist hitting the metal, the swoosh of the fabric as he crawled across the hood, and that smile that never quit. Each second was a hammer blow. I was screaming. Not with my mouth. I couldn't make a sound. I was screaming inside my chest, a silent, internal shriek. Please. Someone. Please. I was completely helpless, pinned in place. And just before I could do anything, smart or stupid, a flash. It cut across my car's interior. I saw it. Not in front. In my rearview mirror. Headlights. They were coming up behind me. From the end of the street. Another car. Another car. The light swept across the windshield, shining right onto the man's face on the hood. He saw it too. And instantly, in a fraction of a second, everything changed. He stopped pounding. He lifted his head like an animal that had been interrupted, and he leapt off my car. But this is what froze my blood. What was more terrifying than him being on the hood? He didn't flee into the shadows. He didn't panic at being discovered. No. He jumped off my hood, landed on the streetlight as a cat, and started sprinting. Toward the back, directly toward the oncoming car. My mind exploded. He wasn't running away. He had simply switched targets. The new prey had arrived. My entire fear was confirmed in that single, horrifying moment. He was a predator. This was a trap. And I was the one who had just gotten away. The spell was broken. It was like someone had injected adrenaline straight into my heart. I wasn't a rock anymore. I was fire. My foot wasn't frozen on the brake pedal. It slammed down. Floor it. The old 2002 engine let out a wailing groan of protest, but it surged forward. I heard the tires screech on the asphalt. I was gone. I didn't look back. I forbade myself from looking back. I dared not check the rearview mirror. I just drove. Eyes locked forward, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't look back until I was on the freeway on-ramp, a mile away, merging into the safe flow of traffic. And then, it hit. The shock. The adrenaline started to drain and left a vacuum. My hands started to shake. Just a little at first. Then, my entire body was violently rattling. I was shaking so hard I could barely keep hold of the steering wheel. I almost had to pull over.
I got out. Oh my God, I got out.
I say I got out, but a part of me didn't. For a long time after that, I stopped driving at night. Completely done. And that area of downtown, I treated it like it didn't exist. I will never ever go near it again. Even in the middle of the day. I took the longer detour home. 15 extra minutes, 20 extra minutes. I don't care. And my car windows. They never go down at night anymore. Never. This is how predators win. Even when they don't physically touch you. They steal your sense of safety. They take the roads you used to drive. The job you used to do. They turn your own city into enemy territory. They leave a psychological scar, a permanent state of alertness, a hum in your head that you can never switch off. The thing that gnaws at me, the thing I keep replaying, is my own naivety. I was ridiculously naive. I automatically trusted, I obeyed someone just because he was wearing a vest. Think about it. I didn't even question why I was stopping, despite the highly suspicious nature of being flagged down at 3 a.m. Quite the opposite. For a split second, I felt reassured. My subconscious thought, oh, good, a utility worker. Must be a road hazard ahead. It's a tactic that exploits basic social psychology. That's how the smartest predators operate. It's Ted Bundy with the fake arm cast, asking girls to help him carry books. It's the guy impersonating a utility worker to gain entry to your home. It uses our own kindness, our own instinct to help and comply against us. It neutralizes the victim before the actual assault even begins. The moment I hit the brakes and stopped, I was a sitting duck. If that guy had a weapon, if he wanted to drag me out of the car, it was too late. I shiver every time I think about it. I tried to rationalize it away. I told myself he was probably just a crazy, high guy, just messing with people. And I really hoped that was true. For my own peace of mind, I needed to believe that was true. But there's one thing that doesn't fit. The thing that haunts me the most. The thing that completely rejects that rationalization. It was the calculation. Insanity is random. This was methodical. This guy dressed up as a road worker, stood on the street, and performed a show, all to make me believe he was an authority. Why wear the outfit? Why go to all that effort? And why would you be trying to flag down solitary cars at 3 a.m.? I don't know the answer. And honestly, thank God, I'm glad I didn't stay long enough to find out what he really wanted from me. That man wasn't just a crazy person wandering the street. He was the trap. And I, in my terror, watched him leap off the prey that had just slipped away, and immediately run to reset that trap for the next car coming through. It's terrifying. I had just turned 20 that year, recently broken up, and decided to plunge into the chaotic world of dating apps. I posted my profile, and before long, I matched with a guy named Alex. Honestly, he wasn't entirely my type, a bit rough around the edges, but his digital profile, that carefully constructed facade, checked all the right boxes. He was in school, had a car, a job, and even a photo with a decent group of friends. Truth be told, I saw zero red flags. No obvious sign of the darkness lurking beneath. He seemed stable, normal, anything but weird. We texted for a while. He seemed to like me a lot, maybe even a little intensely. And then we set up a date. He suggested a driving date, which, looking back now, should have been the first alarm bell I ignored. It meant I would be isolated, trapped, and completely dependent on him for hours. I told myself I was just young and perhaps naive, but I got into his car anyway. The moment he put the car in gear and started driving, the atmosphere completely shattered. We were heading downtown, about a 40-minute drive, and he immediately blasted the music to an unbearable, ear-splitting level that made my chest vibrate, then rolled both windows down into the quiet night. It wasn't just loud, it was an aggressive, public declaration. Alex leaned over the dashboard, screaming the lyrics out the window, his neck veins popping, completely lost in his own bizarre performance. Everyone on the sidewalk stared at us with annoyance, confusion, and, frankly, a bit of pity for me. When I leaned in and tried politely to suggest that maybe it was a bit too loud, my voice barely audible over the bass, he just squinted and smiled wildly. "No way," he roared, waving a hand dismissively. "Everyone loves this music." That complete rejection of reality, that indifference to the fact that he was clearly disturbing others, was the first chilling introduction to his personality. I just curled up in the passenger seat, immediately plotting my exit. This wasn't a date. This was a street performance, and I was the captive locked in the front row. The deafening, loud drive finally stopped when we reached the downtown area. But instead of looking for a decent parking spot near the restaurants, Alex abruptly pulled over to the curb. We were directly across from the city's most famous skyscraper, a sheer block of glass and steel. Before I could open my mouth to ask, "What are we doing here?" he shut off the engine, opened his door, and got out. I just sat there, bewildered, watching. He walked a few steps, and then, without warning, he completely dropped to his knees. He wasn't sitting, he was crouched low to the hot asphalt, and he just started staring up at the towering building, completely motionless. It was a silent, intense, and incredibly bizarre performance that sent a chill down my spine. This was the moment things shifted from just an eccentric guy to something as genuinely wrong. It was a complete break from normal conduct, a deep, social awkwardness that left me asking myself, what the hell just happened? After an agonizingly long period of time, he suddenly sprang up like a coiled spring, the same strange, vacant look still in his eyes. But his voice shifted to forced cheerfulness. "Come on, let's go eat." No explanation, no apology, not a single comment on the behavior, just a jarring redirection. I was completely unnerved, but this mobile nightmare wasn't over. We started driving again, and I assumed he was looking for a nearby restaurant. Instead, he just kept going. He drove through our city, then through another city, and then a third. We were crossing administrative boundaries, pushing my familiar world further and further away. This realization suddenly snapped me awake. We had been driving for hours, and the surroundings were getting increasingly unfamiliar, increasingly less populated with people I knew. The longer the journey went, the tighter the grip of geographical isolation became. I was driving deep into completely unknown territory, and a real fear began to simmer under my skin. The initial loud rock performance was now just the prelude to something much darker and more dangerous. I was entirely in his hands. That remote, directionless drive to dinner dragged on, turning the date into a physical and psychological endurance test. The physical discomfort of being in the car for hours quickly morphed into a palpable psychological threat. Initially, Alex was just overbearing with the music, but then his underlying aggression started to surface. Alex began to unleash extremely hateful and vicious racial slurs, a sudden, brutal outburst that made me recoil. It was a terrifying glimpse into his latent cruelty, a clear indicator of his total disregard for basic humanity. This behavior wasn't just shocking, it was a blaring alarm about the instability of the person behind the wheel. Right after that ugly outburst, something even more unnerving happened. He abruptly turned off the music, shattering the silence with a low, cryptic tone. "You know, I am a very depressed and troubled person," he said, then turned to look at me, his eyes scrutinizing, as if evaluating my reaction. "Can you relate to that? Do you understand that pain?" I was completely stunned, my tongue glued to the roof of my mouth. I had only known this man for a few hours, and I never thought a conversation could delve so deep and so dark on a first encounter. This wasn't genuine emotional sharing, this was forced intimacy. He was coercing me into being a listener, a confidant for his deepest, darkest issues, a blatant act of emotional manipulation. At this point, I realized the true danger was no longer mere discomfort. The atmosphere he exuded wasn't just weird, it was frightening, perilous. I began to feel my physical safety was compromised. But the thought that terrified me more was, if I offended or challenged him, what terrible thing might happen? Don't forget, I was in his car, a sealed metal box in the middle of the night, with no escape route. He already had my home address, and I was 2 cities away from my own home. My survival instinct immediately took over. I couldn't argue, I couldn't object, I was forced to pretend to be nice, to be empathetic. I made myself offer a strained smile and utter meaningless, reassuring phrases. My only strategy was to stay calm, hoping that being agreeable would be my safe ticket home. We finally stopped at a diner and had dinner. This moment felt like a brief, false sense of normalcy, a much-needed, if temporary, respite from the mobile nightmare. He paid for the meal, an incongruous detail of politeness, as if he were trying to offset his prior bizarre and terrifying behavior. The gesture seemed aimed at proving to me, and perhaps to himself, that he could still act like a functioning adult. I ate quickly, trying to keep my face carefully blank of any fear or fatigue, my singular desire now just to get home. My anxiety was no longer about him, but purely about escaping him. But as soon as we got back in the car to begin the return trip to my city, the weirdness immediately returned and escalated into true dread. Night had fully descended, and he started driving. We were headed in the right direction, but instead of taking the fastest highway route, Alex repeatedly chose detours, unnecessary turns through residential areas and desolate country roads. It was a completely intentional delay, a cruel elongation of time. The trip that should have taken around an hour stretched on and on, becoming a psychological siege that lasted nearly 3 hours. He didn't say much, he just drove. And that silence, after all the outbursts, was even more terrifying than any loud rock music. The sensation that he was toying with me, that he was deliberately keeping me, prolonging his control, was horrific and left me feeling utterly helpless. And by this point, we were back in my city. But the hour was very late, around 11:30 p.m. The safety of familiar surroundings was completely swallowed by the danger of the night. The sheer exhaustion from the prolonged fear and the anxiety over what might happen next left my head spinning. We were here, so close to the finish line, but instead of going straight, Alex made an abrupt turn into a darkened neighborhood, where the streets were vacant and the streetlights were old and flickering. This was clearly not the route home. It was a bad decision, and it signaled that the nightmare was far from over. I understood that he was taking me where he wanted to go, not where I wanted to be. In that dark neighborhood, things escalated from a feeling of captivity to a distinct physical threat. Alex started driving with extreme aggression, accelerating very fast, then slamming on the brakes, taking sharp turns dangerously, almost like he was trying to wreck himself or the car. I was thrown back and forth in my seat, the seatbelt biting into me, my heart hammering so violently in my chest I thought it would burst. Anxiety had escalated into sheer terror, pure panic. I tried to find my voice, pleading, "Please slow down. You're scaring me." His response was something I will never forget, a frozen moment of horror. He turned to look at me, his face devoid of all emotion, utterly blank, like a mask of stone, and said, "You know, I've had some really hard days in my life." I tried to maintain my composure to the absolute maximum, replying in the softest voice I could manage. "I know. You told me. I'm sorry." I was trying to be a friend, a reluctant therapist, anything to soothe the beast behind the wheel. And then, he dropped the most chilling confession. His voice was still flat, with no remorse or feeling. Just a recital of a sick reality. I used to get so angry that I would drive my car like this, and I would look for squirrels to run over, just so something else would hurt as much as I did. I was utterly staggered. Horror froze me to the spot. This wasn't just a boast. This was a dark, bloody detail you usually only hear in serious criminal cases. Cruelty to animals is a critical psychological red flag for violent tendencies. The realization that this man, who was holding me as his mobile captive, had just confessed to that level of instability and brutality terrified me beyond measure. I knew he wasn't just depressed, he was dangerous, a ticking time bomb. All I could manage to ask in a whisper was, Do you still do that?" He replied, "No, not anymore." I knew it was a lie, but in my head, I determined that if I showed disgust or challenged him, he would easily overpower me. My only option was to continue playing the submissive victim, to continue being agreeable, trying to maintain the false peace for the last 10 minutes of the drive home. The tension had reached an unbearable limit, and we were only about 10 minutes from my house. I was already planning my exit, The moment I would launch myself out of the car and lock the door the second I saw my roofline. But that hope was brutally extinguished. Suddenly, he asked a question, as if it were a last-minute, innocent thought. "Have you been to this park coming up?" The park sat at the base of a cliff, a secluded area, and it was the middle of the night, absolutely no place to stop. I had actually been there, but even if I hadn't, I would have said yes, because I knew, without a doubt. I didn't want this man driving me down to such a deserted place. But my answer backfired terribly. He smirked, a smile utterly devoid of humor, as if he'd won a chess game. "Oh, perfect. I'm not familiar with it. Can you give me a quick tour?" And he decisively turned right, plunging down the dark road that led to the bottom of the park. My heart seized. The parking lot was completely empty, with only about 6 flickering, old streetlights casting weak glows. In that profound darkness, this isolation was exactly what I had feared most. Honestly, I thought I was going to be killed there, becoming his #1 victim. I wasn't a victim. Clearly, I survived. But his tone and demeanor while we were there was so strange, I can't forget it. He turned off the engine, and the silence immediately pressed against the cabin, enveloped by the darkness and the cliff face. He didn't speak. He just stared at me, and then he essentially forced an intimate kiss. He became aggressively touchy, his hands moving while I continually pushed him away, trying to create the weakest verbal boundaries I could. I used all the false reassurance and calm I had desperately tried to maintain all night. Luckily, things did not escalate past that limit. Finally, perhaps feeling frustrated or simply having gotten enough of the horrific control he craved, he drove me home. The instant the car stopped in front of my house, I practically flew out of the seat and ran straight inside. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. I ran inside, immediately locked the door, and blocked all contact with him. I had escaped an incredibly dangerous date. About 2 years ago, I had to make a seriously long drive, 5 hours to a new job. It was deep in the remote countryside, and I had to start an early morning shift, so it was pitch black outside. I was about 3 hours into the drive, and that's when the bad thing happened. The exhaustion started to hit, but it wasn't the usual, gentle kind of sleepiness. This was a thick, almost uncontrollable drowsiness, a state scientists call sleep inertia. You're awake, but your brain is fighting to snap out of a deep sleep. I tried to fight it off. I pulled over at a rare gas station, bought a scalding hot cup of coffee, and loaded up on sugary snacks. I chewed and sipped, hoping to trick my system. But I knew better. Coffee and snacks are only temporary fixes. They worked for a moment, and soon enough, the sleepiness returned, this time exponentially more aggressive and dangerous. It felt like something dark and heavy was pressing down on my eyelids. This stretch of road was genuinely eerie. There was nothing around me but pine forests, dense and black, swallowing everything. The tall trees on either side formed an unbroken wall, making the highway feel like a dark tunnel. You could drive for dozens of miles and not see a single speck of civilization. The isolation here was absolute. Not another car, not a single light, just me. The faint hiss of the wind, and the occasional insect slamming against the windshield, reminding me that I was passing through nature's domain. I was utterly exhausted. My head kept bobbing, even as I tried singing and pinching my thigh. Then the moment came. For a fleeting instant, I felt myself drifting off, and the car swerved hard to the right, narrowly missing the trees. I jolted awake, my heart slamming against my ribs. That was an undeniable warning. I had to sleep immediately. I had no other choice. I couldn't risk waiting for another official rest stop or gas station. I needed to find a place to pull over. Anything. The moment I saw it, The truth is, when I get that tired, I fall asleep very quickly. If exhausted enough, I can even nod off mid-sentence. So finding a parking spot had become an urgent, life or death mission. It felt like I drove for an hour in that desperation, but probably only 5 minutes passed. And then I spotted it. A small clearing on the side of the road, a tiny pull-off between the tree trunks. It looked like a temporary, unofficial parking spot, meant only for quick bathroom breaks or switching drivers. It wasn't a proper rest area, but to me, in that moment, it was a desperate sanctuary. I pulled in, yanked the parking brake. The relief of that moment was almost overwhelming. Whatever risk lurked in the darkness, it wasn't as terrifying as the danger of dying asleep on the road. The moment I turned off the engine, a strange sensation washed over me. The chaos of the sudden drowsiness vanished, replaced by a heavy, almost crushing silence. It was that unnatural stillness of a deep forest. It swallowed every sound except for my own heart, still hammering from the caffeine overload. I instinctively rolled the window down a crack. I held my breath, listening. In this setting, you should have heard branches swaying, the chirping of crickets, or the faint echo of the highway. But no, absolute silence. It was as if the pull-off where I stopped had severed all connection with the outside world. A cold shiver ran through me. I felt the physical pressure of the darkness, thick and impenetrable, surrounding the car. This isolation. I realized Ma'oma was both my lifeline and a potential curse. I knew that if anything went wrong out here, I was utterly alone, completely unheard. But I was too exhausted to be properly scared. Desperation quickly overpowered all cautious logic. I rolled the window up. Come on, nothing is going to happen. I began trying to talk myself down with rationalizations, attempting to build a wall of false safety. I hadn't seen another car in about 30 minutes. This road was too deserted to be a hunting ground. If anyone stopped, it would probably be the police, checking to see if a driver was in distress. I repeated it in my head. Your job is to sleep now. You need to survive the night. I started the preparations, the almost automatic motions of a long-haul driver. I decided to leave the keys in the ignition, a reckless but necessary decision, as I knew I wouldn't have the presence of mind to fumble in my bag if I were suddenly roused. I hit the lock button, a flimsy, ritualistic gesture against a world of potential danger. Then, I reclined my seat all the way back, turning it into a makeshift bed. The sensation of my back relaxing, flattened out, was so gratifying I almost groaned. Finally, I kicked off my restrictive shoes and placed them on the passenger seat. I should have left them by my feet to slip into instantly and be ready for escape. But in that moment, comfort superseded caution. All these actions took less than 2 minutes. All the motions of a desperate person racing against the very sleep about to consume them. And then I closed my eyes. It was a miracle moment. The cumulative fatigue of 3 hours of tension was instantly released. I fell asleep immediately, without a transition period. No wandering thoughts, no lingering anxiety, just an immediate collapse into a deep, almost comatose darkness. And there I slept, deep and dreamless, in a remote pull-off, swallowed by the black, cold pine forest. I believed I was safe. How stupid. How? I have no idea why I woke up. It wasn't a sudden, loud sound tearing through the forest silence, nor was it discomfort from my sleeping position. Instead, it was a profound, chilling sense, and primal alarm from my body. You are being watched. I shot upright from my dead sleep, my heart leaping into my throat. My eyes snapped open in the darkness, but I couldn't see clearly right away. A bright, inhuman white light was shining directly into my eyes, penetrating the rear windshield. My first reflex was to think of a flashlight, perhaps a park ranger or a patrolling officer tapping on the window. But then, I recognized the more unsettling truth. It was the high beams of another vehicle. The car was parked right behind me, incredibly close. And that intense blast of light didn't just blind me in the rearview mirror, it flooded the cabin, casting the interior in long, grotesque shadows. The confusion quickly dissolved into a distinct, cold anxiety. Why were they parked so close? Why were they shining their high beams directly into my car? The action was deliberate, aggressively threatening. I glanced at my left side mirror. In the powerful glow projected from behind, I saw a man walking, coming right alongside my car. He moved slowly, purposefully, almost silently on the ground. His shape was tall, completely silhouetted with no discernible details etched into the light. He approached and stopped, not by the driver's door, but right next to my back left passenger door. A feverish stream of thoughts rushed through my head, both rational and panicked. Maybe he needed assistance? Should I make it clear that I was inside the car? Or should I roll down the window and ask him what he was doing? A stupid thing to do in this situation. I didn't have to decide. My body went completely rigid as I stared through the mirror and watched the man take action. There was no polite knock, no wave of the hand. Instead, he reached out and violently yanked the back left door handle. A crude, metallic clack. Then again, clack, harder. The third time, he pulled with all his might, creating a jarring, chilling clang of metal in the silent forest air. He was trying to force the car door open. The panic was no longer a thought. It exploded inside me, almost making me scream. It was the violent, horrific realization. I am under attack. The feeling of vulnerability and being hunted inside my own car. My temporary home was horrific. There was no doubt left. This wasn't a good Samaritan. These were predators. The moment that brutal truth dawned on me, a rush of cold blood raced down my spine. I was in total isolation, completely without help. And the attacker was right next to me, less than a meter away, trying to gain entry. I knew I had a few fragile seconds to act before the man figured out how to break the lock or smash the window, or before he realized I was lying down in the car. It was a desperate race against utter despair. In a split second, all logic dissolved. My entire body reacted with a raw, unthinking survival reflex. I had only one weapon, sound. I slammed my entire hand down on the car horn, and I held it tight. The car horn roared, tearing through the thick forest stillness with a shrill, horrible bellow, almost like a struggling scream. The man outside was instantly shocked, jumping a large step back. That was the golden moment, the smallest disruption I could exploit. His momentary stun, certainly no more than 2 seconds, was my only chance at life. But right then, the disastrous truth hit me. My seat, it was fully reclined. I tried stretching my feet for the pedals, but they were out of reach. That flat seat had turned my car into a death trap, a mobile coffin. I couldn't drive. I frantically shoved the seat adjustment lever, but since it was in the maximum recline position, the mechanism was slow and sluggish. I heard the grinding creak of the metal gears, almost as if it were mocking my desperation. Every millisecond was precious, yet the seat needed 2 valuable seconds. I didn't have time to wait. I twisted the key in the ignition, where I had recklessly left it. The engine roared to life, the crude startup noise drowning out the blaring horn. I was still too far from the gas and brake pedals, so I had to heave my entire upper body forward, practically pulling myself into the steering wheel with my arms. The seat offered no back support, leaving me fighting gravity and pure panic. Regardless, I mashed the gas pedal, using only my toes, and released the parking brake. The car responded with a terrifying squeal of tires, kicking up a thick cloud of black smoke behind it, scrambling out of the pull-off. Driving in that position was hell. I had to rely on arm strength to keep myself upright, steering while desperately trying to maintain the gas. But I did it. I drove the car like a fleeing animal, roaring onto the main road. As I accelerated, pushing the needle past the limit, I snatched a quick glance into the rearview mirror. The headlights from the car behind were still there, still on high beams. And then, I saw a sight that froze the blood in my veins. The original man was still standing there, stunned, watching my car speed away. But he wasn't alone. Two more men had appeared, as if they were birthed from the forest's shadow, stepping up to stand beside him. All three formed three terrifying black silhouettes, brutally illuminated by the blinding high beams. And then, the final and worst truth. I saw clearly in the angled light that one of the newcomers was holding something in his hand. It was long, it was thick, and it glinted, reflecting the light. It certainly wasn't a flashlight. It had the unmistakable shape of a crowbar or a large wrench. They hadn't come to check my tires. They had come to rob me, and probably much worse. My body shook violently from the toxic blend of adrenaline and pure terror. I floored the gas pedal, speeding well past the legal limit. I kept going for at least 30 minutes, not daring to glance at the mirror again, until I finally saw the familiar, golden lights of a major gas station, where I knew I was momentarily safe. Finally, I reached that gas station, a blazing oasis, overflowing with neon lights and the rumble of trucks. I pulled into a secluded corner. When I turned off the engine, the silence returned, but this time, it wasn't the deadly quiet of the forest anymore. My entire body was shaking uncontrollably. The sheer adrenaline coursing through me made my head swim and made it difficult to breathe. I took a few minutes to perform basic tasks, adjusting my seat back to the normal driving position. The feeling of back support was the greatest luxury in the world. I put my shoes on. Only then did I dare to look at the clock and was completely shocked. The entire terrifying ordeal, from the moment I fell asleep to my frantic escape, had lasted a mere 10 minutes. 10 fleeting minutes that had almost cost me everything. Regardless, I was wide awake now. The adrenaline had done a better job than any amount of coffee. I drove straight to my workplace, which was surrounded by a strong steel fence and alarm systems. My first sense of true safety came when the huge gate closed behind me. The next day, I recounted the story to my boss. He listened seriously, showing no surprise. He nodded and revealed a chilling truth. That area was notorious for criminal issues that in Sweden they call road pirates, vägpirater. They were organized groups that specialized in targeting drivers who stopped to rest, stealing their possessions and vehicles. This confirmation was both horrifying and comforting. I hadn't been delusional. But one question still haunted me. Why did they try to break into the back door and not knock on the driver's window? The detail about the crowbar, or wrench, answered my suspicion. They weren't good Samaritans. I was unbelievably lucky. I still always wonder, what was it that woke me up after just 10 minutes of comatose sleep? Was it instinct, or just a random stroke of luck that saved my life from those hidden predators in the darkness? I don't have the answer, but I know one thing for certain. I will never, ever pull over on a deserted road to sleep again. Hey, I'm going to tell you about a camping trip that has haunted me since my teenage years. I remember I was about 13 or 14, and I was invited to go on this ultimate trip with my best friend, Pat, his dad, and his uncles. It was one of those boys' weekend rites of passage that every man needs to go through to mark growing up. Now that I'm a father, I do it with my own kids too. Fishing, cooking over a campfire, taking the first sip of beer, the adults, of course, sleeping in a tent. A huge deal. Das Shell, you know. We drove far north, really far. It was a journey that took us away from everything familiar, deep into the wilderness, where the cell service bar ruthlessly disappeared. I'm 30 now, so I can't recall the exact coordinates, but I know it's about 2 hours' drive from where I live now. After hiding Pat's dad's pickup truck in a roadside thicket, we began our journey by canoe. We paddled for quite a while, following a winding, crooked river, until it suddenly opened up into a dead-still lake, where we set up camp right at the water's edge. Although our side of the area was completely secluded and peaceful, directly across the water, across that glass-like surface, something immediately caught the morbid attention of me and Pat, an old shack, which looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The roof was sagging, nearly collapsing, and wild bushes were growing overgrown, almost trying to swallow it whole. It wasn't just old, it exuded a terrible forbidden aura, the kind of thing that only teenage boys would view as an irresistible invitation. At some point, after Pat's dad and the uncles had gotten more comfortable with a few cans of beer and were engrossed in their fishing rods, their guard dropped, and unbelievably, they actually let us venture out. They even entrusted us with the canoe to paddle across the lake to check out that spooky shack. Thinking back now, I would never let my own kids go that far out of my reach in case of an emergency. But they were drunk, and so, with the idiotic courage of 13-year-old boys, we did exactly that. A decision I wish I could rewind time and prevent. We started paddling the canoe across the lake, a potent mix of adventurous excitement and forbidden thrill running down our spines. Our eyes were fixed on the shack as it grew larger, revealing its ugly details. Up close, the cabin looked exactly as rotten as I'd seen from a distance. The wooden planks were faded, the porch was sinking and nearly collapsing, and a smell of dampness, age, and decay hit us. We tied the canoe to a fallen log, our chests swelling with pride. We had done what the drunk adults allowed, but would definitely regret the next morning. Then, the first truly unnerving thing happened. The front door was unlocked, not broken, just simply unlatched. We looked at each other, trying to rationalize. Must have been abandoned for ages, we told ourselves. But when we pushed the door open, that was a massive mistake. Inside, the shack was definitely not abandoned. It was very much occupied, and that instantly froze the blood in our veins. The thought that the owner could be somewhere nearby, maybe watching us from the woods, sent shivers down our backs. The living room was a messy collection of personal items, old pornographic magazines scattered on a table, a bong, a tray full of weed, and empty beer bottles lying all over the floor. The heavy smell of old smoke, mildew, and cannabis created a foul and unsettling atmosphere. On a shelf right there in plain sight were 2 shotguns. I know. We were stupid kids, huh? But you know us. We picked them up. We never chambered around or pulled the trigger, but we walked around like idiots, feeling cool and powerful. Yes, we were technically trespassing, but at the time, we just figured this was the hideout of a couple of local druggies. Still, it was too deep in the woods to be a casual hangout spot. Then, we walked into the room that turned weird into utter horror. It was a small bedroom, but there was no bed. Instead, it was filled with mannequins, the exact kind you see in department stores. But they were completely naked and all wearing wigs of every color and length, from platinum blonde to raven black. They stood there motionless, their blank gazes fixed on us. The room had a deliberate, sick arrangement, like a display case for a twisted preference that our 13-year-old brains couldn't process. The dim light made it feel as if the mannequins were watching our every move. There was a deep wrongness, a cold, filthy vibe to the place. This scene immediately made me think of true crime stories about predators or serial killers, The chill hit suddenly and violently. We had seen enough. The exploration game was over, replaced by a flight for our lives. We quickly put the 2 shotguns back on the shelf, without exchanging a word. We scrambled for the door, jumped into the canoe, and paddled away as fast as we possibly could. We had intruded into an unsafe place, and now we were racing against time. As we paddled the canoe back to shore, we were gasping for breath, almost speechless. We spilled everything to Pat's dad the moment we landed. I had braced myself for a furious scolding, but his reaction was far worse. When he heard about the hunting rifle, the disgusting mess, and, worst of all, the room filled with mannequins and wigs, his face went completely pale. The drunkenness vanished instantly. In that moment, he understood that we hadn't just been fooling around. We had stumbled upon something truly bad, something dangerous lurking deep within those remote woods. A cold, heavy tension radiated from the adults, and we knew instantly that the joking was over. We tried to act normal. That evening, we still went fishing, and Pat's dad grilled the fish Pat had caught over the campfire. But the air was different now. Heavy, like the sky before a storm. And then, the worst happened. While we were eating dinner, 2 men, without a doubt, the owners of that grotesque cabin, arrived in a motorboat. They pulled right up to our campsite. At first, they acted strangely friendly, laughing and chatting about our trip. We told ourselves they were just fellow fishermen. But then, they got to the point. They invited us all to come over to the cabin across the lake to hang out and have some fun. Pat's dad immediately declined, politely, but with a cold edge, saying we had to wake up early. Still, the 2 men stayed. They kept chugging beer from their cans, their eyes growing darker, more distorted. I saw them exchange quick, knowing glances, wordless signals, calculated and chilling. The fake friendliness dissolved, replaced by a suffocating tension. The moment of peak dread came when one of them looked Pat and me dead in the eyes and asked if the 2 of us wanted to go with them. That's when Pat's dad, fully sober and driven by pure survival instinct, snapped out a single word, "No," sharp as a blade. His voice carried authority and warning. The awkwardness that followed was unbearable. The 2 men lingered a while longer, clearly weighing whether to push things further, until the darkness swallowed the woods. At last, they gave up, turning their boat and disappearing into the night, leaving behind a silence that buzzed with menace. That night, Pat and I lay in our tent, whispering about the guns, the mannequins, and the way those men had looked at us. Deep down, we both knew something terrible had almost happened. While we tried to sleep, Pat's dad and his uncle sat awake beside the dying campfire. They didn't sleep. The faint crackle of burning wood was the only sound breaking the tense stillness. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were keeping watch over us. It was a long, cold night, thick with a primal fear. And I will always be grateful for their vigilance, because it probably saved our lives. Finally, somehow, we succumbed to exhaustion and fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up to an unusual sight. Everything was completely packed. Pat's dad had decided to cut the trip short and leave immediately. There was no fire-cooked breakfast, no cheerful smiles. We broke down the tents and loaded the gear into the canoe. In a heavy, eerie silence, the whole group left the campsite, paddling back up the river with a hurried pace, as if we were being hunted. Most of the drive home was spent talking about one thing: how terrified Pat's dad had been. He was a tough man, but his fatherly instinct had overridden everything else. He understood it perfectly. That shack did not belong to regular campers. It was a hideout for freaks, and the shotguns and wigged mannequins were undeniable proof. Pat and I talked about this story occasionally for years afterward, an unexplainable, chilling memory. Unfortunately, we had a major falling out, and years passed without contact. So, I never got the chance to ask exactly where that campsite was. I swear I never want to go back there. But sometimes, late at night, I am still haunted by the unanswered questions. What was truly happening in that mannequin room? And did those two men, after we left, continue to look for other lone camping kids? It was just a typical, boring Saturday night. The kind of quiet, suburban evening my wife usually complains is too dull. We had just finished watching a B-list action movie, Skyscraper, and were driving home around 9 p.m. Our neighborhood is a new, safe, beautiful, upper-middle-class development, the kind of place where you rarely bother locking your car doors. And by modern design, we don't have separate mailboxes in front of each house. They're all grouped into one large cluster at the end of the street. Because of this, unless we're expecting something important, we usually don't check it. But tonight was different. I knew an Amazon package was waiting for me. We pulled up to the mailbox cluster. The package was there, as expected. But right next to it, tucked into our slot, was a stark white envelope. It was meticulously typed, addressed clearly to me. The return address section gave no sender name, just a house number, and that number was on the street directly behind ours. This immediately struck me as odd. We had just moved in and truly didn't know anyone, let alone someone who would carefully type a letter to me. A cold feeling ran down my spine, that gut instinct that something wasn't right. The fact that someone knew my name, typed it, and mailed it. It went beyond a random act. Curiosity. That inherent human failing. One. My wife was driving, and I tore open the envelope. Under the faint, yellowish glow of the streetlights, I pulled out the paper. What I read was not just shocking, it stunned me, sending my heart hammering in my chest with a heavy sense of revulsion. It was short, stark, and like a punch to the gut. We are watching you, Mr. Sexperver. Accompanying the text was a crude, poorly cut out image. Two unsettling eyes staring up at me, as if they'd been clipped from some old magazine. I froze. My wife glanced over, her face paling as she read over my shoulder. The confusion quickly turned into hot, searing rage. Let me be clear, I am not a pervert. I am a faithful husband, so normal that my wife frequently complains. I have never been accused of anything strange in my life. I had zero context. The feeling of being accused of something vile, something completely unfounded, was truly horrifying, as if a dark, intrusive ghost had just walked straight into the middle of our peaceful life. We looked at each other, the fear in her eyes reflecting the utter confusion and outrage in mine, and we couldn't just go straight home. The feeling of being stalked, of being falsely accused, was so heavy it was almost suffocating. The first and only thing to do was to find the source of this threat. My wife, still trembling, drove slowly around the street directly behind our house, the street used as the ghostly return address. We crept past, little by little. It was a street identical to ours, brand new houses, the faint streetlights casting eerie shadows. I strained my eyes at every house number, counting back from the start of the block. The letter was sent from a fake address, yet a very specific one. It only listed the address of this street, with no name. And this is when the incident turned from a bad joke into a truly personal threat. The house number that, if it existed, would be located directly behind our kitchen wall, was skipped. Yes, for whatever reason. When the builders numbered the houses, they had skipped that particular number. The sender knew this. The person was so familiar with the area that they understood the neighborhood blueprint, knowing exactly which number was skipped, but was the precise location to target. This meant one thing: This wasn't some random stranger passing through. This was local. This was someone living nearby. That thought was more terrifying than any ghost. We drove back home, my initial anger completely dissolving, replaced by a cold anxiety and heightened alertness. My wife, who is usually very composed, was shocked and genuinely starting to panic. She gripped my hand. "You have to call the police right now. We can't take this as a joke." Despite my reluctance, I didn't want to waste police time over just a letter. I agreed. I called the sheriff's department, explaining the entire incident in as much detail as possible, including the detail about the geographically knowledgeable fake return address. They agreed that the incident was disturbing, acknowledging the behavior as a clear form of harassment. They said they would send an officer to file a report, but they made no promises about the time, explaining that this wasn't a high-priority emergency call. We hung up. It was a numbing feeling of helplessness. We had done the right thing, but now, in the enveloping darkness, we were left sitting in our own house, feeling exposed and vulnerable, waiting for help that might take a long time to arrive. We stared out the window, the darkness seemingly swallowing everything outside. Intense anticipation. We had just settled onto the sofa, trying to regain our composure after the shock of the letter and the police call, a total of only about 5 minutes after arriving home. We were both still staring anxiously out the window, trying to analyze every shadow outside. It was exactly then that everything escalated from a paper threat to an aggressive, actual invasion. Our car alarm started screaming. It wasn't a soft warning beep, it was a frantic, piercing, echoing siren, tearing through the late-night silence as if the car were under violent attack, right in front of us. I know. Sometimes I accidentally hit the panic button in my pocket while walking around. But this time, I was sitting still by the window, my hand firmly holding my key fob. I kept hitting the stop button, pressing it over and over, but the horn just screamed relentlessly. It was completely unresponsive. The built-up pressure from the vile letter, the confusion about the stalker, and the helpless wait for the police completely made me lose my mind. It felt like someone was playing with us, activating our fears perfectly and deliberately. I was so tired and furious. In one impulsive, totally overwhelmed moment, I slammed the key fob down hard on the glass table next to me. I heard a terrifying, crisp crack. And when I looked down, the plastic casing was shattered, the circuit board completely exposed. I had manually destroyed my own key. My wife stepped in. She quickly regained her calm more than I had at that moment, pulled out her key, and pressed the button. The siren immediately fell silent. The sudden quiet after that madness was more terrifying than the noise itself. Now, we had our second piece of evidence, undeniable physical proof, that something was very wrong. This wasn't a technical glitch. This was a deliberate act, carried out by someone who was watching us closely. Everything had turned from a bad joke into a real confrontation. After the car finally fell silent, the air inside the house thickened with tension. The silence after the piercing siren was even more frightening. The police still hadn't arrived, and the feeling of being watched made it impossible for us to sit still. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice hoarse with adrenaline. "Let's drive. Let's go back to that street. Check that skipped house number one more time. Maybe we missed a detail." My wife nodded immediately. We both needed action, needed to escape this house that felt like a trap. We drove around the back, heading toward the street with the non-existent return address. As we pulled up to the area where the fake address would have been, we found an unusually strange sight. Our next-door neighbors, the D's, and the man living across the street, Mr. H, were all standing outside in their yards, huddled together, talking frantically and angrily. In this neighborhood, where privacy was paramount, This was a flashing red light that something extremely serious was happening. We parked the car and quickly stepped out. As we got closer, their voices grew louder, filled with shock. I immediately asked, "What's going on? Is this about our car alarm?" Mrs. D practically screamed, her face a mixture of fear and anger. "Your car alarm? Our car just went off too. It was screaming at the exact same time as yours." I was stunned. I had been so focused on my own frustration, on my broken key fob, that I completely failed to hear their car alarm, even though their car was parked right between our two houses. But Mrs. D and Mr. Bash had heard it. The incident was not an action targeting me individually, but a simultaneous attack. The chill that had run down my spine now turned into a horrifying certainty. Someone had deliberately triggered the car alarms of two houses, two cars, at the exact same time. This was a coordinated act, an act meant to create a greater distraction and perhaps to conceal another objective. And then, Mr. H, the neighbor across the street, stepped forward. His face was still flushed with adrenaline. He said he was the one who heard both alarms screaming at once, and he had rushed to his door to look. What he saw next shed a terrifying light on this story, making the stalker's actions tangible and more dangerous than ever. Mr. H, our neighbor across the street, began to recount his story. His voice was still shaking, but his eyes clearly showed horror and alertness. When he heard the two car alarms scream simultaneously, a rare, almost impossible occurrence to be random, he ran out of his house immediately. And right in front of his yard, parked on the edge of the street, was an unforgettable sight. A black car, a large sedan, utterly dark and stealthy. And here is the detail that chilled me to the bone. The car lights were completely off. In the car, Mr. H saw the silhouette of a man sitting in the driver's seat. The person was doing nothing, just sitting motionless in the darkness, as if waiting for a command or observing a target. When Mr. H stepped out of his house, his sudden appearance clearly spoiled the intruder's plan. Immediately, the black car reversed aggressively, spun around, and sped away at a terrifying speed, still keeping its headlights off. It was a brazen violation of a quiet neighborhood, an act that could only be described as a getaway. Mr. H tried to do what anyone would do in anger and fear. He ran after it, trying to catch the license plate, but it was too dark, and the car vanished in a flash. He emphasized that the man's actions were too quick, too decisive, like someone who was trained or executing a secret compromised mission. Now all the horrifying pieces clicked together, forming a picture so chilling it sent shivers down my spine. The threatening letter, the fake, yet geographically accurate return address, and the climax, the event of two cars being simultaneously triggered by an unknown individual, who then hastily fled in the darkness. Clearly, the purpose was not just to scare us, but to draw us out of the house by the chaos of the alarms, so they could observe or carry out the next act. Mr. H had also called the police right after his unsuccessful chase. The feeling of being stalked, of being violated, had now become tangible, dangerous, and was lurking inside that black car. Exactly 5 minutes after Mr. H called, and about half an hour after my initial frantic call, two sheriff's deputies pulled up. Their arrival was like a scene from a movie. Two patrol cars, one coming from the front of the street, the other from the back, simultaneously illuminating our gathering group with their headlights. This was an uncanny coincidence. One car was responding to my call about the letter. The other was from Mr. H's report about the mysterious black car. Two officers got out. One walked straight to me. The other spoke to Mr. H. But only a few seconds later, they were already cross-referencing their information, and the confusion was visible on their faces. Clearly, they were dealing with two separate incidents, that were perfectly linked in time and location. The police's bewilderment only amplified our anxiety. They began questioning me, procedural but probing questions that dug into suspicion. Do you have any enemies? Any vengeful ex-girlfriends or family issues? Have you ever been accused, even slightly, of anything strange in the past? They looked at me with scrutinizing eyes, as if trying to locate some buried, dirty secret. I had to answer no to everything, sticking to the truth that my life was tediously normal. I repeated my assurance. I have no clue. I am not Mr. Sexperver. The officers examined the letter. They looked at the typed envelope, the bizarre, cut-out eye image, and the non-existent return address. One of the officers, who seemed more experienced, remarked that the behavior indicated sophistication and malice, not an impulsive kid's prank. They also confirmed that the simultaneous triggering of 2 car alarms and the getaway car driving without lights in a residential area were extremely suspicious and calculated actions. They filed a detailed report, collecting the letter as evidence for analysis, even though I had touched it. They gave me their business cards and gave me a stern warning. If anything else happens, a strange noise, a flickering light, anything at all, call us immediately. The sense of relief from having the police there quickly vanished. They took the evidence and left us with an undeniable truth. We were still targets, and they had no leads on the harassers. We stood there watching them drive away, leaving the street submerged in a heavier silence than before. Despite having 2 police cars, we felt completely alone. I barely slept that night. The bed felt hot and suffocating. The combination of confusion, anger, and the sense of violation kept circling in my head like a waking nightmare. I lay there wide awake, every detail replaying like an endless horror loop. Why me? Why Mr. Sexperver? I wrestled with the thought of whether I had unintentionally slighted anyone, even in the smallest way, at work or in daily life. But I simply couldn't find any clue that could lead to this sick vendetta. My wife lay beside me. She was scared but trusted me absolutely, which was the only source of comfort that kept me from going insane. What drove me crazy was the level of local knowledge this stalker possessed. My name and address were certainly on the HOA, Homeowners Association website, a simple detail any resident could access. But using the return address of a non-existent house number on the street behind me was undeniable proof. This person knew the neighborhood structure, knew about the flaw in the contractor's numbering. This wasn't some random person on the internet. This was someone right here, an anonymous neighbor. The thought of being watched by someone who lived a wall's length away was more terrifying than any stranger. And then there was the car incident. Was it a coincidence? Absolutely not. The simultaneous triggering of 2 car alarms and the fact that the mysterious, lightless black car fled the moment it was spotted cemented the link between the letter and the vehicle incident. These weren't 2 separate events. They were a coordinated, calculated campaign of terror. This person wanted to create chaos and fear, and they succeeded brilliantly. All of this sent my imagination spiraling. Was this person a paranoid madman who mistook me for someone else in the neighborhood? Or was it someone who knew about an old neighborhood story and deliberately framed the newcomer like me? Or worse, was this some form of more sophisticated and professional harassment aimed at my mental stability? I felt helpless trying to find a face, a motive, a reason. But all I found was a terrifying void. The letter was gone with the police. The black car had vanished. But the fear remained, lurking in every corner of the house. I knew that until we installed security cameras and found out who the real Mr. Sexperver was, we would live with the feeling that those creepy eyes were still watching us from somewhere in the shadows, right here in our quiet neighborhood. I was just a little girl, maybe 8 years old. For my family, cross-state drives through Wyoming were routine, almost a tradition. My mother loved packing us up, my sister and me, into the old car and just driving. We had relatives scattered all over the state, and this trip was no exception. My memory of this terrifying event is patchy, filtered best through my mother's reaction, an image of primal survival etched forever. Anyone who has ever driven through Wyoming knows those roads are an absolute desolate wilderness. You can drive for hours and not see another soul, just dust and the endless sky. That very isolation created an unusual sense, making the presence of any other vehicle far too prominent. We had been trailing an old green and white pickup truck for hours. It kept a steady distance, a random companion in the empty asphalt desert. After a long stretch, we were thrilled to see a rare gas station appear. My sister immediately jumped for joy. All she wanted were those little wax juice bottles, a sweet childhood luxury. The green and white truck pulled in, and we followed. Everything was strikingly normal. We used the restroom, fueled up on chips, and my mother filled the tank. It was a perfect slice of safety, a carefree moment in the middle of the journey. Then we were back on the road. But as the car settled on the highway, the cheerful silence of two kids munching on snacks was cut short. A cold feeling started to emanate from the front seat. I saw my mother looking directly into the rearview mirror, and then, in a slightly unusual tone, not quite fear, but enough to get my attention, she asked, "That truck driving behind us, is that the same one we followed into the gas station?" I turned around to confirm, still preoccupied with my wax candy. "Yeah, Mom. Still the same old green and white truck," I said, then settled back down and resumed chewing, not thinking much of it. But I was wrong. Instantly, I sensed the shift in the atmosphere. My mother, who was generally a very calm person, whom I had never seen lose her temper, began exhibiting an unmistakable sign of abnormality. She was a tiny woman, only about 5 feet tall, weighing maybe 100 pounds. But she always had a presence, a kind of "don't mess with me" aura that kept my friends, and even other adults, wary. And now, that presence had transformed into a wire-tight state of alert. She started checking the rearview mirror constantly, not the usual glance, but a deliberate, sustained observation. The highway ahead just kept stretching, with no turnoffs, no signs in sight, only the sky and the dust. Then the cruel game began. The truck behind us was no longer keeping a safe distance. It would suddenly accelerate, tailgating our bumper so closely that I could clearly see the rusty details on the green and white grille. It would stick to us, creating an awful, suffocating feeling, then lightly brake and fall back a bit, only to repeat the action a few minutes later. That wasn't poor driving. That was predatory behavior. It went on for miles, that constant acceleration and falling back, as if they were trying to ruin my mother's nerves. Or worse, looking for a weakness to force us to the side of the road. In the unnerving silence inside the car, I knew for certain this was no longer a coincidence. It was deliberate. Someone in that truck wanted us. The sheer vastness and isolation of Wyoming had turned into a trap, and we were the prey being hunted. After that long, haunting stretch of being tailgated, we saw another gas station. This time, it was no longer an oasis of safety, but a rendezvous point for a silent confrontation. My mother had made up her mind. She adjusted the rearview mirror, looking at us in the back seat. Her voice was very low, very calm, but I could feel the knife-sharp coldness beneath the composure. She said, "I'm going to pull into this gas station and open my door as if I'm about to step out. The two of you are absolutely not to open your doors. Don't step outside. Just sit still, keep your seatbelts buckled, and hold on tight." We looked at each other, confused, but my mother's gaze instantly shut down any questions. My mother, the woman I mentioned who was only about 5 feet tall and weighed around 100 pounds, suddenly became colossal in my eyes. She had that peculiar ability. In situations of necessity, she transformed into a steel wall. I was afraid, but not because my mother was afraid. It was because of the deadly coldness in her eyes, an absolute focus on survival. We pulled in, right up next to a gas pump. My mother kept the engine running, and true to the plan, she flung her door wide open, creating a look of vulnerability, as if she were completely off guard. That was the bait. The green and white truck pulled in right after us, but didn't stop at a pump. It parked slightly to the side, in a strategic position that blocked a potential escape route. The driver, a massive man, easily 3 times my mother's size, stepped out. He walked to the front of his truck, popped the hood, and propped it open, starting to feign tinkering, turning his back entirely to us. It was the classic trick. He wasn't broken down. He was pretending to be busy to lure my mother out of the car. The gas station was no longer a rest stop, but a perfect trap. My mother held her position in the car for a few seconds, and those were moments of extreme tension. I don't know what she was waiting for, but the instant the green and white truck locked its position and the massive man turned his back, my mother acted. She abruptly slammed her car door shut, a deafening bang erupting in the unnerving silence. Simultaneously, she floored the gas pedal. Our car roared and rocketed out of the gas station. There was no warning, no look back, just the pure action of defiance. I whipped my head around, just as expected. The massive man spun around, startled. He looked straight at us, and I will never forget that look. It wasn't confusion, but an explosive rage. He understood he had been played. In an instant, the pretense of car repair was dropped. He slammed the hood shut with a loud bam, even though he had only pretended to look at it for a few seconds. That very action confirmed all of my mother's fears. At this point, my mother was driving like never before. I had seen her drive fast, but this was the terrifying speed of someone fleeing death. The car darted away in an adrenaline-fueled frenzy, and I almost lost sight of the truck behind us. Ahead, the road curved sharply to the left, and there was a small road that branched off to the right with a few old buildings. Right before the curve, my mother slammed on the brakes, and I felt my body lurch forward. She yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, and the car, as if lifted straight from a high-budget action movie, drifted a perfect arc around the corner, dirt and gravel scattering everywhere. She didn't turn. She threw the car into the corner. Then, she sped across the dilapidated parking lot of one of the buildings and concealed herself behind it. From our hidden spot, we were completely out of sight, but we could clearly see the main road. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought the whole car could hear it. It wasn't long after we concealed ourselves behind the building that we heard the furious roar of an engine. Just seconds later, that green and white pickup truck flew right past us. He didn't slow down at all, didn't even glance toward the side road my mother had taken. He clearly believed we had to be somewhere ahead, and the sheer rage of being outsmarted sent him speeding off in vain. The moment the truck disappeared around the curve was when we were absolutely certain we were the target. The threat was real, and we had just narrowly escaped. Both my sister and I were shaking with adrenaline-induced exhaustion. My mother turned off the engine. The silence inside the car was heavy, broken only by our ragged breaths and racing heartbeats. My mother turned back and asked if we needed to use the restroom. I said yes, and my mother agreed. But then, she shook her head. She said we would wait a bit longer, and then she uttered the line I will never forget, a brutal statement. Unlike the calm mother I knew, my mother looked out the window, toward the desolate Wyoming road. Her voice was low, icy, and absolute. "I would rather pee my pants in this car than be murdered on the side of the road." That statement drove the final nail into my young consciousness. At 8 years old, I understood a horrifying truth. My mother wasn't exaggerating. She no longer saw this as a typical car chase. She saw death lurking. That was the moment we realized that the lonely, forgotten highways of America could easily become a place where you simply vanish. Isolation is a predator's shield. After another while, we resumed our journey, cautiously and with frightening alertness. We never saw that green and white truck again, but its shadow followed us for the rest of the miles. I have to start by saying this incredible, chilling story was relayed directly to me by my grandmother. She's one of those people who has a crazy, almost spooky, recall for facts. I mean, she can tell you a story from 50 years ago as if it happened last Tuesday. The story I'm about to share took place in the late 1970s, specifically in the Detroit metropolitan area. But don't picture neat suburbs. Picture the middle of nowhere. At that time, where my grandparents lived was deep country, a lonely, unpaved dirt road, primarily surrounded by open fields, thick woods, and just a few scattered farms to the north. They were truly isolated. Their house sat on 10 acres of rough land, set far back, ensuring no one driving past could see them. Their only real neighbors were my great-grandparents, who lived about 60 yards away, close, but not close enough to hear every strange noise at midnight, and to the left and right of their property. Just half a mile of dark, quiet fields before you hit the main road. The situation was tense even before the action started. This was the late 70s, a time when a knock on the door in the dark was a serious issue, and my grandfather worked the night shift at a local auto plant. My grandmother was home alone in that big, isolated house with their 3 young children. Every single night, when his truck rumbled away, she took on the job of guarding the family against the vast, silent darkness. One particular night, she was up late, sitting in the living room watching TV, probably trying to drown out the stillness. It was late, around 11 or 12 o'clock, when she heard it, a distinct, heavy knock on the front door. She immediately froze. The knock was wrong. Too late, too isolated, and too sudden. She crept to the window, peeked through the curtain, and confirmed her worst fear. By the light of the moon, she clearly saw there was no car. None in the driveway, none visible along the long, empty road. A stranger at midnight is a threat. A stranger at midnight with no vehicle is a trap. But I have to give huge credit to her presence of mind. Their home was a tri-level, meaning the basement was half underground, and the upper level wasn't as high as a typical 2-story house. Knowing this gave her a tactical advantage. Instead of going to the door, she quietly went upstairs to the master bedroom, which was located directly above the front stoop. She slowly opened the window and looked down. She could see the man clearly, standing right there on her porch. Her quick decision immediately put a vital barrier between her and the danger. Her voice tight with caution, she called down and asked him point blank what he wanted. The man on the porch looked up at her, illuminated by the faint light above, and his face instantly became unsettling. He was too tense, too focused to be just someone in genuine distress. He launched into his pre-prepared story, claiming his car had broken down further up the road, and he had walked all the way back here, to her deep, secluded house, just to use the phone. He tried to make the lie sound plausible by adding a key detail. He was supposedly on his way to his girlfriend's house, who lived right around the main corner ahead. My grandmother listened, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, telling her everything she needed to know. It was the geography detail of his lie that completely broke the story. The corner he mentioned Where he was supposedly headed was only a few hundred yards further down. If his car had truly broken down where he described, the most logical, safest, and fastest thing in the world would have been to walk straight ahead to his girlfriend's house. Instead, he claimed to have walked half a mile backwards down a pitch-black dirt road, crossing fields and woods, straight to her house, the most isolated house on the entire stretch. The logic was completely non-existent. It was a massive, glaring red flag. He was not in distress. He was a trap. My grandmother realized with cold certainty that the broken car excuse was just the bait, a classic, terrifying ploy to get her to unlock the door. Leaning out the window, she kept her voice firm and level, telling him point blank that she simply could not help. She suggested he try walking up to the corner he'd just mentioned. It was his only real option, and that is when his entire performance collapsed. The mask of politeness fractured. His voice immediately switched from pitiful to pleading, then to full-blown agitation. He started harassing her, demanding to know why she wouldn't help, promising he'd be quick, promising he would leave right away. Just please let him in. His sudden, intense desperation sounded forced, as if he were racing against some invisible clock. This was clearly the last step in a horrific, pre-planned sequence of events. The tension was so heavy she could almost feel it. Every instinct she had screamed that if she went downstairs, that would be the moment the violence started. She held her ground, repeating that he had to leave, unaware that her refusal was not what would end the night. The pressure in the space between her refusal and his desperate pleas was incredibly intense, like a string about to snap. My grandmother was completely focused on the man on her porch, trying to maintain the resolve to send him away, when the stillness was shattered by an utterly violent sound. It wasn't the slow, creeping footsteps of a stalker. It was the reckless, the headlong rush of someone running at full speed. She heard rapid footsteps sprinting across the gravel road outside in the darkness. The sound loud and frantic enough to make her skin crawl. The noise ended in a heavy, sickening bam. The unmistakable sound of a body hitting the ground with full force. In that exact moment, the agitated man on the porch spun around and bolted from the stoop, plunging into the night. He was gone in a flash, dissolving into the thick darkness of the field, completely losing interest in using the phone. His immediate flight confirmed everything my grandmother had suspected. The appearance of distress was just the bait, and that crashing noise was the signal that their plan had failed. Her attention snapped immediately to the source of the noise. She looked toward the side of the house, near the detached garage, where the crash had occurred. She saw two figures locked in a brutal struggle. One man was on the ground, clearly the one who had just been tackled, and a third person was on top of him, delivering a savage, unforgiving punishment. This wasn't a scuffle. This was pure, unrestrained rage. The man on top was raining down relentless, aggressive punches directly into the face of the one underneath. The raw brutality of the scene horrified her. In that single second, she understood the entire setup. While she was distracted, leaning out the window, dealing with the decoy, the second man, the accomplice, had been pressed against the front of the house near the garage. He wasn't hiding, he was ambushing, waiting for his cue. These people were working in pairs, banking on her reflex to open the door for someone who seemed to need help. The man on the porch was the lure, and the hidden one was the aggressor, ready to rush into the house the moment she touched the lock, ready to do terrible things to a woman and her sleeping children. A cold dread swept over her as she realized she had been mere seconds away from opening the door to that nightmare. She was watching the violent conclusion of a crime that was meant to have been hers. The brutal fight next to the garage lasted only a few more moments, a flurry of quick, intense action. Finally, the subdued man managed to wriggle free from the relentless assault. He stumbled to his feet, clearly dazed and in pain, and joined his accomplice by scrambling into the pitch-black night. The two shadows were now gone, swallowed by the empty fields, leaving nothing behind but a deafening silence and the adrenaline pounding in my grandmother's heart. It was then that the man who saved her stood up, dusting off his sleeves, her unexpected protector. It wasn't just a neighbor, it was her cousin. He was visiting my great-grandparents next door. He happened to be up late at their kitchen table, probably having coffee or a snack, when he saw the two figures approaching the houses in the dark. He watched how they moved stealthily, noticed their coordinated, suspicious actions, and particularly saw one separate from the other to take up a hiding position against my grandparents' house facade, right next to the garage. When the knock on the door began, he knew instantly that this was not a person in need, but an act of intrusion. He didn't hesitate for a second. While my grandmother was upstairs, dealing with the decoy, her cousin slipped out the door and ran at full speed across the short lawn between the two houses. He wasted no time on warnings or challenges. He launched a full-force, tactical attack on the lurking man. The assailant never saw it coming. The cousin hit him like a freight train, and the accomplice dropped, as my grandmother put it, like a sack of hammers. He subdued the man before the culprit could even register the threat, delivering the quick, decisive punishment that broke their entire criminal plan. The reason he was so quick, effective, and brutal in his attack is a key detail. At the time, my cousin was a decorated boxing champion in the Navy's Pacific Fleet. This wasn't just an angry neighbor. This was a trained, professional fighter. The speed, the tackle, and the rain of blows were a strategic, military act of defense protecting his family. He neutralized the threat instantly, saving my grandmother and her children from a terrifying night with a single, violent act of bravery. The immediate aftermath was a strange blend of high-octane panic and profound, bone-deep relief. As soon as the two criminals vanished, the cousin went to my grandmother, ensuring she and the children were safe, his adrenaline slowly wearing off. My grandmother, still shaking from the sheer horror of what almost happened, immediately called the police. When authorities arrived, the details of the story were laid out: the false plea, the hidden accomplice, and the violent, sudden intervention. A thorough search of the area was conducted, and police patrolled the surrounding roads and fields. Unfortunately, the two men and their getaway vehicle were never found. They vanished into the vast, dark isolation of the Detroit exurbs, likely having quickly retreated on foot before getting back to their vehicle, which was probably stashed much further away. The lack of an arrest was disappointing, but the cold reality was that they had escaped what should have been a true crime story. However, there was one crucial piece of evidence left behind, a gruesome testament to their failure. On the gravel driveway, right where the scuffle took place, police found irrefutable proof that the accomplice had been thoroughly beaten. 2 human teeth. It was tangible, physical evidence of the violence and the successful defense. This was a chilling detail, a stark confirmation of how close and brutal the encounter had been. My grandmother, in a truly unforgettable gesture, chose not to let this terrifying night fade into a blurry memory. She took those 2 teeth, cleaned them, and placed them in a small glass jar. To this day, she still keeps that jar. It is a macabre souvenir, a strange trophy from the night her life was nearly destroyed, and an insistent reminder of the incredible chain of events that saved her. It speaks to the power of instinct, her immediate refusal to open the door, and the power of unity, a chance-awakened, observant, and champion-skilled cousin. Those 2 teeth are the physical embodiment of the fear, the lie, and the justice served on that lonely dirt road in the late 70s. When I was in 7th grade, I wasn't stupid. I knew perfectly well when someone was watching me, and I certainly wasn't unattractive. I was athletic, active. I played soccer and hit the gym to stay fit. I wish I had loved myself a little more back then. But that wasn't the main issue. The main issue was that I was clearly underage. My face still looked like a $10-year-old's, and I was always lugging around my enormous backpack. To make matters worse, my middle school was right next to the Starbucks where this creep worked. I was $12, just 4 months shy of $13, and I was going through a tough time mentally. So I kept meticulous notes in my journal about every single encounter with the guy. Those journal pages are the only reason I could piece this entire sequence of events together. I was new to the area, and my new school had a ridiculous rule. They wouldn't let students inside early. My mom had to drop me off at 7 or 10 a.m. on her way to work, but school didn't start until 8:40 a.m. That hour-and-a-half wait was horrible, especially in Texas. It was either stiflingly humid or pouring rain. So, to avoid being stuck outside in the terrible weather, my only sanctuary was the Starbucks next door. The place was always packed with middle schoolers, and even elementary school kids, because the primary school was connected to mine by a gate. Just seeing a girl with a backpack made it abundantly clear that she was a minor. I was always a clumsy, awkward person in new environments. That first morning, I was so self-conscious about taking up an indoor seat that paying customers could use. That very social anxiety led to my biggest mistake. I sat outside in the blistering sun for a whole hour. I regret that decision to this day, because the creep saw me out there, completely isolated. He saw me as an easy target. He walked straight out, started a conversation, and immediately laid on the compliments about my long hair and pretty face. When he asked for my name, I instinctively refused and said I wasn't comfortable giving it out. From that moment on, his casual attention turned into a blatant obsession. Finding out my name became his own personal, chilling mission. After that first encounter, I finally mustered the courage to go inside, finding a seat in the corner. At least there, I was surrounded by more strangers, and I felt slightly safer. But the creep was not deterred. He was frighteningly persistent. In my journal, about a month into the school year, I wrote, "This new school is too new and too weird. Since I started sitting at Starbucks before school, that employee won't leave me alone. He keeps making me free drinks and talking nonsense. I feel guilty and gross. I have this feeling he's flirting with me somehow." That guilt always haunted me. I grew up being called spoiled by my older sister, so I always tried to say no to everything offered to me. Accepting the free, cold, sweet coffees from a stranger made me feel bought, indebted, as if I were part of an agreement I never consented to. But one morning, he crossed the line from sneaky whispers to a public, chilling performance. I walked into the cafe. He was cleaning up somewhere, and he was clearly in charge of the music. A song I'd never heard was playing. He saw me walk in and started singing along badly, describing what I was wearing and comparing my long hair to Rapunzel. It was a public act, overly personalized, which completely unnerved me. I noticed a few customers looking. He had already made my usual drink and handed it to me, as if I were his own special VIP customer. He knew my schedule as clearly as if he wore a personal alarm clock. This wasn't just employee kindness. This was basic predator grooming, testing boundaries publicly, establishing a special rapport that I couldn't escape, creating dependency. Usually, I sat in the corner opposite the counter, but that day, I deliberately turned my back. I didn't want him to see my face. I didn't want him to have any nonverbal reaction to analyze. The fact that I had to change my seating just to avoid his eyes said everything. He had succeeded in creating a sense of being watched and possessed. I had to face the truth. Those free drinks were the sweet bait designed to keep me right there. I did my best to hide. I sat in the corner, head down over my phone screen, headphones perpetually plugged in, trying to create an invisible shield by pretending to be busy. But the creep was not the type to give up. He was frighteningly persistent. He had made finding out my name an obsession, a required milestone in his sick game of control. He would frequently loiter near the register, looking for opportunities to question other middle school teachers who came through. Luckily, most of them didn't teach me and didn't know my identity. He was patient, a cold, stalking, terrifying kind of patience. And then, the inevitable happened. One morning, as I was sitting quietly in my corner, my history teacher walked in. He wore his ID badge and lanyard clearly, a perfect, unavoidable target. The creep made his drink, and as my teacher was about to leave, he made his bold move. He pointed directly at me, the 12-year-old girl trying to shrink into herself, and asked my history teacher. It was a brazen violation of my privacy. My teacher, completely oblivious to the free coffees or the guy's stalking behavior, did what a polite person would do. He answered casually, "Dakota," he said, and walked away. And that is how he got it. My real name, my final protective shield, was broken, not by my weakness, but by a trusted adult who unintentionally handed it over. A rush of cold dread went down my spine. It was a paralyzing moment, a feeling of being exposed, of having my last layer of defense stripped away. From that minute on, I was no longer just the girl with the long hair and the backpack. I was Dakota, and he had secured a piece of my personal information, a major advance in his effort to control me. The next morning was hell. My mom dropped me off earlier than usual, and I was silently praying, pleading that the creep wouldn't be on shift. But, of course, he was. He had won half the battle, and now he was radiating a frightening confidence. He kept calling me by my name, or at least the warped version he'd heard, Jackakota. He repeated it in a bizarre way, drawing out the first syllable as if it were an intimate nickname, something he had bestowed upon me. Being called by a mispronounced name that I had never authorized him to use felt even more violating than being called by my real name. I grabbed my usual cold drink and sat waiting for almost an hour until it was nearly time for class. When I got up to leave, he called out that name, Jackakota, again. I reluctantly turned back toward the counter to see what he wanted. He slid a large, hot drink across the counter toward me. I remember being utterly confused. Why would he make me 2 drinks? Plus, it was still sweltering hot Texas summer, and I always drank cold beverages. When I asked what the drink was for, the creep flashed a wide, unnerving smile, as if he had just performed an act of immense generosity. He said, with a chillingly serious tone, "This is for your teacher, because he was kind enough to tell me your name." The world stopped around me. That statement wasn't just a thank you, it was an assertion of power. He had weaponized my teacher, and this hot drink, a completely inappropriate gift for a stranger to send a teacher through a child, was a way for him to force me to participate in his stalking behavior. He wanted me to acknowledge and transmit his action. He wanted me to feel awkward walking into class and saying, "This is from the guy at Starbucks who asked my name." I was stunned. I couldn't speak. I could only do one thing. I shoved the hot drink back across the counter, turned my back, and bolted out of the store. I am so proud that I did that I refused it. I am eternally grateful that I wrote everything down in my journal immediately. Later, my brain tried to create a false memory to protect me. The image of me reluctantly carrying the hot cup down the hall to my teacher. But the terrifying truth was recorded. I gave it back. I broke the chain of control he was trying to bind me with, if only for a brief moment. Every time he escalated his actions, my fear grew thicker, heavier. What started as a nasty annoyance had turned into a genuine sense of threat. I tried to reason with myself, but deep down, I was documenting it all, with the kind of drama only a 12-year-old who dreamed of being a writer could summons. In one journal entry, I wrote these chilling lines. We all have that person who makes us want to do everything for them. We all have that person who makes us question our sanity. Friends, we all have that person we are afraid to ever admit we are afraid of. And then, I wrote his name, the Starbucks guy. This wasn't teenage exaggeration. I was genuinely terrified of this creep. His obsession didn't stay within the four walls of the coffee shop. One afternoon after school, I saw him outside. He was standing right in front of Starbucks, talking and laughing with two women who were smoking. They had small children with them. He loomed over them, flashing that wide, unsettling smile. I stood near the window, watching him. I couldn't stop looking, but at the same time, I had to keep my head down, my hoodie pulled low. I didn't want him to see me. I didn't want him to recognize me. Seeing him outside of work, acting so normal, so charming, only made everything worse. It amplified that chilling sense of his control and the quiet, simmering danger behind it. What made it all unbearable was the special treatment he gave me. He never made free drinks for anyone else, only me. He constantly told me I was beautiful, words no grown man should ever say to a middle school girl with a backpack. He knew I was underage, and he was exploiting that fact completely. His final escalation came one afternoon. That day, he wasn't wearing his name tag, something I noticed right away. Then he asked me, "Do you want to know my name?" Inside, I screamed. Part of me wanted to know, not because I liked him, but because I wanted information. A name meant power. A name meant I could warn people, the principal, parents, anyone. But I also knew, if I said yes, he would take it as a sign, as interest, as permission. I couldn't let him believe that. I couldn't give him false hope. So I stayed silent. And in that silence, I wanted him to understand one thing, that he had failed. Completely. That there was no connection. There never would be. The creep's obsession was most clearly and chillingly demonstrated through the financial aspect. He had given me too many free drinks. I kept murmuring to myself, too many damn drinks. I knew the rules of the coffee shop well. An employee couldn't casually make dozens of specialty drinks for one customer, especially a minor, without getting into trouble. That could only mean one thing. He paid for all of them out of his own pocket. I did the math in my head. Each specialty drink, usually the cold ones I preferred, cost at least $5 to $6. Over those months, he must have spent well over $100 just buying coffee for me. This wasn't just an act of kindness. This was a persistent and frightening investment. He was trying to create a sense of indebtedness and obligation, a financial trap to make me feel I had to be there, unable to refuse his presence. He used money to buy my attention, turning the coffee shop into a place I was forced to attend. But I found a way to fight back, a small act of control in a situation that was completely out of my hands. I figured out his schedule. I knew he never worked on Wednesdays, so, for the rest of that school year, I only allowed myself to step into Starbucks if it was a Wednesday. That was the only day I could sit inside the shop, order a cold beverage, and enjoy the fragile sense of safety, knowing that no eyes were tracking me, and no man was calculating the cost of possessing me. My journal entries stopped there, but the obsession did not. Even though I employed the Wednesday-only strategy to avoid him, I would still frequently catch sight of the creep on my walk to school. I'd glimpse him through the coffee shop window, or see him standing outside smoking during a break. Every time I saw him was a fresh reminder that he was still there, still working, and I was still considered his target. This story doesn't end with me reporting him or some thrilling confrontation. It ends with psychological exhaustion. I'm grateful that he never got any more personal information or any form of reciprocation from me. But the cost was my sense of safety and freedom in a public space that I was forced to navigate daily. I was a child, and I had to spend most of my 7th grade year mapping out an adult man's schedule and altering my own routine just to avoid his unwanted attention. He knew perfectly well I was a minor. He acted with boldness, openly, and without concealment. Looking back, I wish I had been strong and loved myself enough to share what was in that journal with my mother immediately, instead of letting my fear and guilt hold me captive in silence. The last thing I keep returning to is that fateful moment on the very first day, when my social awkwardness led me to choose to sit outside in the blistering sun alone. It was a small mistake, but it made me the most vulnerable. It was my 12-year-old solitude and anxiety that became the beacon for a predator. The harsh lesson I learned is that sometimes it's the vulnerability itself, not the appearance, that attracts the scariest people. This story happened just a few weeks ago, and I swear to God, I still feel that heavy, cold knot in my stomach. Being a dog walker, and a woman at that, means I spend most of my week alone, deep in the woods, secluded parks, far away from busy streets. You are forced to develop a habit of high alert. It's no longer a choice, but a primal survival instinct. I track every strange noise, every shadow, every person who appears around me. Up until now, I'd been pretty lucky. Nothing truly terrifying had happened. That day, I was walking my usual pack, 3 tiny, fluffy dogs. Picture them as the complete opposite of a dog that could scare anyone away. I had 0 big dog privilege to rely on, so I had to be doubly vigilant. Basically, they were adorable, vulnerable targets. The moment he appeared, things were already off simply because of the way he just materialized. One moment the trail was empty. The next, this guy was walking straight toward me. He was middle-aged, thin, dressed a little oddly, shorts and a dark hoodie, even though it was quite warm. But at a glance, nothing screamed danger. He looked like a perfectly normal man, very much an average Joe, maybe a runner or a local out for a walk. He immediately started making small talk, the kind of innocuous exchange people use to break the silence, commenting on the weather, complimenting how cute my dogs were. I was polite, even friendly, fully prepared to dismiss him as just another random, harmless stranger you meet in the woods. We live by that social contract, right? That most people are good. I figured he'd say his piece, and I'd move on. I was completely wrong about that. The pleasant conversation about the weather and the dogs took a sharp, unsettling turn. His gaze, which had been idly sweeping over my face and the dogs, suddenly became sharp and focused. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping just enough to create an air of secrecy, yet it was incredibly menacing. "I saw another walker yesterday," he began, the topic change completely jarring to the setting. "She had a dog that looked stressed, so I tried to help him socialize." This immediately raised my suspicion. It was an unprompted story, told with a strange, unwarranted pride. The way he spoke didn't suggest he knew the other dog walker. It sounded like a justification for an aggressive, uninvited intrusion. And my intuition was confirmed immediately when he continued, his tone becoming condescending, as if he were the greatest dog trainer and the other woman was an idiot. "Yeah, I know a lot about dogs, so I got the slip lead out and tried to introduce him, and she freaked out." The words hung in the air, heavy and deeply unsettling. A complete random stranger was admitting to aggressively interfering with someone else's working dog, attempting to gain control of the animal against its owner's will, and then describing the owner's perfectly rational reaction as freaking out. as if it were an overreaction. The story wasn't meant to connect with me. It was meant to assert the entitlement and disregard for personal boundaries he allowed himself. It was a test. He stared into my face, scrutinizing, wanting to see how I would react, gauging how far he could push. The carefree nature of that sunny afternoon immediately evaporated, replaced by a cold, primal fear instinct. And while I was still reeling, my mind racing to process the sheer audacity and the hidden threat in his story. Who on earth puts a slip lead on a stranger's dog? He ended the moment with an action that turned mere unease into utter terror. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie, the one that seemed far too warm for the weather, and with a quick, deliberate motion, he pulled something out and held it up. It was a slip lead. It was a simple length of braided nylon with a metal ring, forming a noose. For those who don't know, this isn't just a regular leash. It's a tool that acts as a choke collar, a restraint device that tightens infinitely if the dog pulls. It's a mechanism of control capable of inflicting pain and fear, and he was holding it in his hand, displaying it to me like a trophy. It was a grotesque, deeply unsettling image. In that exact moment, one of my dogs, Milo, the tiny terrier mix, who normally loves everyone in the world and would melt for a belly rub, started to emit a low, guttural warning growl in his throat. It was not a playful sound. It was ancient, defensive, and entirely out of character for him. The other two dogs immediately shrank back, huddling against my legs. And him, he didn't even flinch. He just laughed, a short, dry, chilling laugh, utterly devoid of warmth or humors. The sight of this man, standing alone in the woods without any dog of his own, holding this coercive tool, and the primal reaction of my normally gentle animals, froze the fear in my throat. Why was this object, this potential weapon, tucked away in his pocket? What was he really seeking when he helped that other woman? Clearly, this was never really about the dogs. The dog's growl and his cold laugh shattered the paralyzing shock. His proximity and the casual way he displayed the slip lead created a sense of physical threat, a silent demonstration of what he was capable of. I knew I had to leave, and I had to do it immediately, without showing any sign of panic or confrontation. My throat tightened, but I managed to muster a plausible excuse, pulling gently on the leashes as I spoke. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I have to go now," I said, trying to make my voice sound urgent but normal. "My dad is waiting for me in the car. I'm already late to meet him." The lie sounded flimsy, but it at least created a clear endpoint, a protective male presence that I hoped he would respect. I turned and started walking quickly, forcing myself not to run, keeping my pace steady and my back straight. I could feel my back warming up, completely exposed to him. He didn't say goodbye, or even acknowledge my words. I didn't dare turn around to look, but the feeling of his presence, the chilling certainty that he hadn't moved, that he was still standing there, was palpable, and that was confirmed by my dogs. As I walked, they kept crabbing sideways, their eyes glued over their shoulders toward him. They weren't following me comfortably. They were retreating backwards from him, pulling against the leash while emitting constant, low, protesting growls. Their body language was a wordless, screaming warning. "This guy is dangerous." Their anxious murmuring and the heavy, silent realization that he was still there, watching me retreat, measuring the distance, made those few dozen yards back to my car the longest, most awful walk of my life. I finally made it to the car, hands shaking. I fumbled with the unlock button, tossed the dogs into the back seat, and slid into the driver's seat. The click of the door locks was the only sound that allowed me to take a full, shuddering breath. I didn't drive away immediately. I just sat there for a few minutes, trembling uncontrollably, glued to the trail in the rearview mirror, waiting to see if he would reappear. The moment the adrenaline subsided, the true horror of the situation hit me, Everything my gut had been screaming, the pieces I couldn't connect in the moment, suddenly snapped into a chilling, cohesive picture. He was not a friendly stranger with a weird interest in dogs. He was a man deliberately seeking out vulnerable women in isolated locations. He forced conversation, boasted about terrorizing another woman and her pet, and then produced the very tool he uses to impose his will. That slip lead was not an accessory in his pocket. It was a psychological weapon, a clear sign that he was prepared to inflict pain or control on any creature or anyone who resisted him. I thought of the other dog walker he had terrorized. I thought of my tiny, defenseless dogs. I realized that his conversation was never about dogs at all, but about testing boundaries and establishing his dominance. I stopped shaking, pulled out my phone, and did the only thing I needed to do. I logged the exact time, the location, and the most detailed description I could muster of the middle-aged man in shorts and a hoodie. I drove to a spot with better reception, pulled over, and called the police to report him, trusting that persistent, primal voice of fear was what saved me.